We are coming up on 9:30.
Directors meeting for the California High-Speed Rail Authority, May the 16th, 2024. Before we get started, if I can ask Director Cohen to do the Pledge of Allegiance, lead us today, please. To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We could now call the meeting to order and ask the secretary to call the roll.
Director Schenk.
We see her.
Present.
Perfect. Chair Richards.
Yes.
Director Camacho.
Yes.
Vice Chair Miller.
Here.
Director Perea.
Here.
Director Gametti. Director Escutia. Director Williams. Director Cohen.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Secretary. And now if you would let the people here and who are joining us electronically to let them know what they need to do if they'd like to speak with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Before we begin public comment for the California High-Speed Rail Board of Directors meeting, I would like to go over some important information. For members of the public who have joined us in person and wish to provide public comment, you will be called on in the order we received your card. If you are joining the meeting via Zoom and wish to provide public comment, please use the Raise Your Hand feature located at the bottom of your screen. Or if you are dialing in by phone, pressing the number 2 will raise your hand and put you into our queue. Speakers will be called on in the order their hands are raised. Once you are in the queue and your name is called, please click the prompt on your screen to allow your microphone to be unmuted. If you are joining by phone, we will call on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. At that point, you will hear a message that your phone is being unmuted. Each speaker will be given 2 minutes to speak. I will remind you when you have 15 seconds remaining. When it is your turn to speak, please slowly and clearly say your first and last name, and if applicable, state the organization you are representing. Mr. Chair, we will begin with the in-person speakers. We have none. We will now move on to the Zoom participants. Once again, if you are joining the meeting via Zoom and wish to provide public comment, please use the Raise Your Hand feature located at the bottom of your screen. Or if you're dialing in by phone, press the number 2 and then raise your hand to put you into our queue. Once again, each speaker will be given 2 minutes to speak, and I will remind you when you have 15 seconds remaining. When it is your turn to speak, please slowly and clearly say your first name and last name, and if applicable, state the organization you are representing. Mr. Chairman, our first Zoom speaker is Frank Quintero.
Good morning, Mr. Quintero.
Good morning, Chair Richards. Thank you for the opportunity to address High-Speed Rail Board and Authority. Simply would just like to say we enjoyed the open house that was conducted. We received great input. Staff was professional and provided a lot of information. It was nice to see the residents excited, knowing that high-speed rail is more than just a concept and it's becoming reality. We were also able to meet with representatives from the Boys and Girls Club, and we heard their concerns along with high-speed rail staff, and we are working on solutions with them. And we hope to engage the same with our Senior Citizen Incorporated group. But overall, very pleased with the outcome of the meeting, and your staff, ARUP, Foster's, and all the contractors involved were awesome to work with. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Quintero, and thanks for the support from the City of Merced.
Mr. Chairman, we have no other attendees that would like to provide public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now then move into our regularly published agenda. Item number 1 is the approval of the minutes from the April 7th or 11th of.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Please call the roll.
And Board Chair, I'll just note that Board Member Escucia has joined.
Okay, thank you.
Director Schenk,
Yes.
Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Vice Chair Miller,
Yes.
Director Perea,
Yes.
Director Gametti,
Yes.
Director Escutia,
Yes.
Director Williams, Director Cohen.
All set? Okay. Item number 2 is the consideration of concurring with the staff recommended preferred alternative, the shared passenger track, alternative A for the Los Angeles to Anaheim project section for identification in the draft EIR EIS. Our Southern California Regional Director, Ms. DiCamillo, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. Testing that out for me. Thank you for the opportunity to present for our Los Angeles to Anaheim project section team, a recommended preferred alternative. So I'm going to go through some slides that are a little bit of a repeat of what we did in November and update you on the work that we've done since then to identify a full preferred alternative for the board, hopefully to consider and adopt today to put this project section moving forward. As a reminder, first slide, Southern California is divided into 4 project sections: Bakersfield to Palmdale and Burbank to Los Angeles. Environmental study has been complete. We're working on Palmdale to Burbank, and we're here today to talk about Los Angeles to Anaheim. Next slide. Just an overview of what we're going to talk about today. The 2018 preferred alternative, it was adopted by the board in 2018. I'll talk a little bit about why that one wasn't embraced. We'll talk about what our new recommended build alternative is, the shared passenger track alternative. We've made some refinements since November, so we'll talk about those refinements. We did a lot of outreach on those refinements, and we came up with a staff recommended preferred alternative. Next slide. As a reminder, the 2018 alternative was basically focused on the track that's shown in blue in the graphic. It's a BNSF freight right-of-way that's used currently by Metrolink, Amtrak, and other carriers. It's currently 3 mainline tracks. We were proposing to add a 4th mainline track and dedicate 2 tracks to passenger and 2 tracks to freight. So we referred to it as this 2+2, and they were going to be dedicated. But in order to limit BNSF freight trains to 2 tracks, we had to take some volume off of that corridor. And we had proposed to build an intermodal facility, which is shown in the orange block in Colton, in the Inland Empire. And then we also needed some staging tracks. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those do, but we had some staging tracks identified in the Barstow area. Next slide. We received, this is just a layout of what those 2 facilities would look like. In Colton, a large intermodal facility to offload trains. The containers would then go on trucks and go to local warehouses, versus the staging tracks are literally just additional tracks. Next slide. We received tremendous concern and opposition to the intermodal facility at Colton. As a result of that, the team went back to the drawing board in early 2023, and in November, we released a supplemental alternatives analysis of what else we could do within the Los Angeles to Anaheim project section corridor to connect Union Station to Anaheim Arctic. So that was released in November. Next slide. We identified within the supplemental alternatives 3 new build alternatives. One is a shared passenger track alternative, which is what we're proposing to move forward with. We looked at a tunnel alternative, which is shown in the fuchsia color in the middle, predominantly along the I-5 corridor. And we also considered a Union Pacific rail right-of-way at the bottom. It's one of their older right-of-ways. It required a bit of work, and we had difficulty getting to and from it, so that also required some tunneling. And then we compared those three alternatives to the 2018 alternative, as well as a no build. Next slide. So the shared passenger track alternative, instead of that 2+2 dedicated track in the corridor, we're proposing that instead of having to take trains off by putting them in an intermodal facility, we'll just run freight trains under the catenary. So we will, from time to time, allow freight trains onto the passenger tracks. And by doing so, we're able to accommodate the freight volumes that are anticipated within that corridor. As part of that plan to accommodate the freight trains, we would propose to reduce our frequency. At one point, we had looked at up to 4 trains per hour per direction. We're now thinking 2 trains per hour per direction, which is consistent with what we've looked at in the PER and the latest business plan. System-wide, looking at 3 trains per hour per direction, we just stopped one, basically at Union Station, and the other 2 would run through to Arctic. So that in that way, we can actually accommodate all the volume that we're anticipating within this corridor without needing to build the intermodal facility. Next slide. Some benefits of this approach: it utilizes an existing rail corridor. Obviously, then we don't have to acquire properties and acquisitions, which can be complicated. It eliminates the intermodal facility. It basically builds on a synergy of the other operators who use the corridor. So we're actually able to benefit them as well. And possibly we think share in some of the capital costs as well as the operating costs, because we'll be improving their corridor as well. So it builds on a synergy to do that. As I mentioned, we'll reduce our frequency slightly. We're going to be able to meet the 2040 passenger rail plan, state plan, and we will need some staging tracks to help mitigate for the freight within that corridor. So the next slide is going to talk a little bit about what that staging track is. In our supplemental alternatives analysis, we looked at different sites where we could basically hold a freight train until it has an appropriate slot to put into the corridor. And so we anticipate we need to hold up to 4 trains. We have not done a full design on what that will look like. It could be done with 2 16,000-foot tracks or 1 very long track. But this is generally the area in the high desert that we've identified for purposes of that operation. Coincidentally, maybe, Caltrans is also looking at a similar project because of the current congestion in the corridor now on the 3 tracks. Caltrans, their division of rail, already had in mind something similar to this. So we have been working cooperatively with Caltrans and even had a joint meeting for the public to talk about the staging tracks. If Caltrans proceeds with their version of the project, we will, depending on the timing, either remove it from our environmental document or at least not build it. We'll be able to rely on what Caltrans has planned in that area for this operation. It not only mitigates the operations, it really helps during construction. If we're closing the corridor for some reason, freight is able to stage their trains out there and hold them until that corridor is open again. So we are anticipating the need for this additional mitigation. Okay, with that, on the next slide, we brought that to you in November. Oh, no, I'm going to talk about the other 2 alternatives very briefly. Those have been, we recommend not proceeding with those. 3 to 5 times as much cost with those other alternatives. Increased construction time. Anytime you tunnel, there's tunnel spoils that have to be moved. So a lot of air quality impacts as a result of these other options. And there was no opportunity for the synergy of helping and coordinating intermediate stations with the other passenger carriers. So the staff has recommended not proceeding with those. Okay, the next slide, I think, is the one I was. So there were 3 things that we left in November and said we hadn't quite finalized. The location for a light maintenance facility, because we know in Southern California we're going to need some sort of light maintenance facility. An approach to intermediate stations. So do we need to stop our trains and have a station between Union Station and Arctic? So we're going to talk about that today. And then our approach to grade crossings in the community of Anaheim. For the most part, within this corridor you see on the map from Union Station to Fullerton, most of those crossings have been grade separated because it's a busy corridor, already 3 tracks. But there are a lot of at-grade crossings between Fullerton and Arctic. And the team went back and did some evaluation and consideration of how do we approach what's happening between Fullerton and Arctic. So we'll talk about that as well. Okay, next slide. Starting with the light maintenance facility locations, light maintenance would be a place for us to do just what it says, light maintenance. So on equipment, we might do some emergency repairs. We would restock the equipment, but it's basically for that light maintenance purpose of our equipment. We identified 2 potential locations. We looked at a couple others and narrowed it down to 2. One we're referring to as 15th Street. This is a nomenclature that we took from Amtrak. They have an 8th Street light maintenance facility, and we'd be directly south of them. In the green area would be 15th Street, the orange area, 26th Street. So we identified those 2 potential options. Next slide shows you 26th Street in a little deeper dive. It is adjacent to BNSF Railway's intermodal facility. They refer to it as Hobart in the community of Commerce in Vernon. It would serve 24 train sets, 6 shop tracks. What we like about this particular layout, that long, narrow configuration is good for train movements, makes trains movements a little easier, but we can also get it in either end. We have access on either end, which makes operations more convenient and fluid. One of the concerns, it's a little bit further from Union Station than the 15th Street alternative, but we think we can work around that. It is kind of a congested corridor for rail between Union Station and this particular area, but we think that we can work through that. The next slide is the 15th Street option. As I said, it's not as long and narrow, but we do believe that we could make this work for 20 train sets, 6 shop tracks. It's a little bigger acreage wise. It's closer to Union Station. And let's go to the next slide that does a nice side-by-side of these 2. So side-by-side, you can see the acreage on the 26th Street is a little less. It gets us more train sets. It's double-ended. And one of the things that I didn't mention that we like is that it minimizes displacements and cost impacts, because some of those properties for the 26th Street site we were planning to acquire anyway for some work that we needed to do on the main track in that area. So we like that as an advantage. So overall, the staff is recommending the 26th Street location. I think the next slide should take us to the intermediate stations. So on the intermediate station issue, in the past, the authority had gone back and forth between whether or not we were building at Norwalk Santa Fe Springs or Fullerton. At one point, we might build them both and do a skip stop operation. The bottom line is, because of Prop 1A limitations in our station development, we only had space for one. We could only build one more. So we looked at, is there a preference on either one? And in the end, the staff is recommending that we proceed with our preferred alternative to say no intermediate station. So our trains would just go straight through. And we will carry these forward as design options. Part of the reason for that recommendation is they're already served by existing Metrolink and Amtrak services. If one of our passengers really needs to make a transfer, they can do so at Union Station or at Arctic. Once we build a station or platform, we also have to build the parking and so forth that goes with that. So there are impacts and costs that come with building the station. And this carrying them forward as station options will still give us the opportunity in the future to really analyze and decide if one of them makes sense. But at this point, the balance wasn't going either way. And frankly, we're thinking we don't really need that extra station or stop for our operation. We'll still have the 1-seat ride all the way to Arctic. So staff is recommending that we not do an intermediate station. And the last issue, the third issue, should be the next slide. Oh, I did do a layout of the Norwalk Santa Fe Springs property with the station on the left and without the station on the right. Next slide is the Fullerton, the same kind of side by side for Fullerton. As you can see, a very congested area. It's exciting in one way because it's already built up and there's some potential there, but there's also impacts then that come with our platform. So with the station on the left, without the station. Okay, the next slide should be the grade separations. Okay, so just to make sure that the public in particular knows what we mean when we talk about grade separations, we put together a slide that shows the different options of how to approach a crossing. On the left, you have a crossing that's at grade, and we're all familiar with those. In the middle is an example of a grade separation. The train could go over or under the traffic, but we're basically trying to separate that traffic from the train operations. And then in this particular corridor in the Anaheim area, we had looked at closures, and we had actually put in 2018 proposed 2 closures. But a lot of times that takes property as well to build the cul-de-sac so traffic can turn. Bottom line for grade separations, they're required by the FRA at speeds over 125, which we will not be at. Our maximum design speed will be around 90 or at 90. So they're not required. So the team went back and said, well, do we really need to build all these grade separations? Because there are pretty serious impacts when you build a grade separation. So in the next slide, we'll do a side-by-side of what was proposed in 2018 and what the team is proposing now. So in 2018, we had 5 crossings that we proposed to grade separate, and we're now proposing to leave them at grade. We had 2 road closures that we're proposing to leave at grade and open as they currently are. We need to modify 4 existing grade separations, and then most of this in the table, you can't read those tiny little names, but as we move south, we need toward Anaheim Arctic, we need to put in a track for staging and turning trains. So as we get close to Arctic, we need to grade separate Cerritos and State College. So those will continue to be recommended for grade separation. And then we'll leave at grade Santa Ana Street. Next slide. This is an example of the impacts of grade separating East Broadway. This is just one that we pulled out. We have this side by side for all of them in the preliminary impacts assessment that was attached to the board memo. And it just shows when you grade separate, it does take a lot of property in and around the grade separation. On the next slide, some of the reasons for leaving them at grade. It's currently OCTA owned. That's Orange County owns it. They recently improved a lot of the crossings for safety improvements. There are 2 tracks there currently. We don't anticipate we're not adding any additional tracks. So it's currently 2 tracks. We'll continue to have 2 tracks. It's predominantly a passenger operation because the freight trains that were on the other corridor that we were talking about go straight east. So they're not taking that south turn like we're proposing to do at Fullerton. Those freight trains would be going straight east. So we're not having to add additional track there. And so when we looked at it, we're like, well, why? We don't think that any of them at this point need to be grade separated other than those that we need for our design toward Arctic. All we're coming in and doing is adding that catenary for our operations. This approach is more consistent with what we did in Northern California as an authority. It lessens the property acquisitions that are necessary. We actually got comment from the community concerns about the property impacts. That's summarized in the preliminary impacts assessment. And then of course the cost, there is a cost associated with all those grade separations. So the staff is recommending that for study purposes, we study it predominantly in its existing condition, mostly at grade, with the exception of those crossings that we need. So we'll study it at grade, and then if mitigation recommends a crossing, we'll mitigate appropriately based on traffic flow or emergency response times, but we will study that. So that leads me into the next steps, I believe, on the next slide. We did do a number of in-person meetings and virtual meetings on each of these issues for the LMF sites and the grade crossings. Each station location got an in-person meeting, and we met with the community, showed them boards side by side, as well as the outreach. And there wasn't any feedback that we received inconsistent with what I've described today. Next slide. So the staff is recommending as a preferred alternative to carry forward in our draft environmental document what we're referring to as shared passenger track alternative A, which is the 26th Street location for the light maintenance facility. So that would be our preferred alternative. We're actually recommending carrying both LMF sites forward for analysis. It's just our preferred site is the 26th Street, but we would also study the 15th Street site and carry that forward as an option in our environmental document. Next slide. So for the public, I know you've all seen draft environmental documents, but we would propose both of these alternatives, full study for our environmental document that'll cover all these different topics. It's just that we're leaning to, letting the public know that we're leaning to the 26th Street site with the design options for the stations and the at-grade crossings in Anaheim. Now, the last slide gives you, I think, our schedule. Yep. We select the preferred alternative now. Today, we should have a draft environmental document out this fall or winter. And then about a year from that, our final environmental document, and we'd bring it to you at the end of 2025. We believe that we're on schedule for this. And I think then I go to the next slide is a summary of what we're asking for. And this is in the board resolution. We're asking for the board to concur with the recommendation for shared passenger track alternative A as our preferred alternative. And then we will continue to work with stakeholders as we develop our environmental document within those communities. And that is what I have today.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to remind the board that this particular segment in this issue is the sort of final requirement we have on environmental documentation for phase 1 of the high-speed rail system. We, both as a matter of Proposition 1A, the bond bill, and more importantly, in some ways, the federal grant agreement we have with the ARA grant, is that we're required to finish the environmental document for each of the segments of phase 1. The LA to Anaheim stretch is the final part of that. When we talk about time requirements on phase 1, it does not apply to this segment. Our time requirements are really for San Francisco to Los Angeles, but not for the stretch to Anaheim. And of course, phase 2 comes out of LA and gets to San Diego, going through the Inland Empire. So this is a bit of a different segment here. But again, this is before you because I want to commend LaDonna and our environmental team, who's done a lot of work. We got a lot of blowback on the 2018 version of this. Listened to the communities, particularly environmental justice communities, and worked hard to come up with an alternative that we could at least adopt as a preferred alternative, and then use that as the basis to start the fuller environmental review, which will take the next couple of years to complete. But I just wanted to give you guys context for why this is before you. It's the final piece we're required to do consistent with our federal grant obligations, and that's why this is here today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, CEO Kelly. Do we have any questions for Ms. DiCamillo? Any comments from the board members?
Sorry, Chair Richard, just want to let you know that board member Anthony Williams has joined us as well.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Director, Vice Chair Miller.
Thank you. Thank you, LaDonna. This is a great presentation. Just a point of preference for me. I mean, I know what Arctic is, but I think it's important to spell that acronym out on a map, because sometimes people think it's a city and then they want to know where Arctic is, but you know, it's not. So, and then on the alternatives, I'm sorry, tell me again, the 15th Street I thought was closer.
15th Street is closer to Union Station. It's a smaller facility, and it doesn't have the double-ended.
Right. So it's unusual to see two alternatives fully looked at in an EIR. So I mean, I know we're leaning towards the 26th, but
you actually have 6 in Palmdale to Burbank.
Right, but I mean, they're not.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? Usually you have your preferred and you just typically go to that, and look at the others, but
yeah, we're leaving the door open for the 15th Street Light Maintenance Facility as well.
okay. So there's not a real good reason to just drop it at this point. Leave it in, but not.
We think it's safer for us to analyze them both. It's just we want to let the public know we're leaning to 26th Street.
Okay, and the only other question was going 90 on a at grade. That's still okay with FRA?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, Director Galmetti.
Donna, what's the distance between 15th and 26th miles away?
Miles distance, I would guess no more than 2. 1. That's my staff guy, my analyst.
1 mile?
It's about a mile difference. Yeah, and there's not much difference in the distance.
Yeah, I like
15.
the double-ended, and that's what you prefer too. And if it's only 1 mile, that it seems silly to have the other one on there, but that's my opinion.
It's just, you never know what happens in the analysis and what might be an obstacle. So this gives us some flexibility.
Great job. I mean, you listen to everyone in the community out there to reverse course and come up with this solution. I think is great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Galmetti.
Teams worked hard. I have a big team behind me.
Any other questions or comments?
I too have heard from the industry and everything that you provided today, and given them an opportunity to give feedback has been very well received. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
I used to represent, when I was in the state Senate, Santa Fe Springs and Norwalk. How does the community of Norwalk and Santa Fe Springs feel about not having a high-speed rail station in their station that they have right now? I don't think the people are going to be happy to have to go all the way back to Union Station and then transfer to a Metrolink to get to Norwalk.
I would say the feedback we heard, and it's summarized in more detail in the preliminary impacts assessment, but the feedback we heard was kind of balanced. It was some saying, yeah, we'd like a station. We're concerned about the impacts. So we heard a little bit of both. By carrying forward the design option, we are able to, at a later date, insert it still into the alignment and move it forward as a station. But at this point, yeah, at this point, they were concerned about all the impacts too. So we heard both sides.
Okay. Thank you, LaDonna.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Mr.
Please,
Chairman.
Director Schenk.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, LaDonna, great job. Thank you. Very understandable. That's also important that individuals who are not steeped in this understand what's going on. And so you made it very understandable. But my comments are not about this, because I will vote for it, but it's more at the 30,000 foot level, and CEO Kelly's comments were directly to the rant that I had with him the other day about this. And I was going to save my comment till board comments, but by then people are bored and don't want to listen. So I'll make my comments now. Now, I want to keep in mind, in everyone's mind, this is high-speed rail, not a commuter rail. And it distresses me, and I know we're following all the legislation, the ensuing legislation, but the little history lesson going back to 1981, when I first proposed this, to when I was in Congress, wrote the legislation, this is supposed to be high-speed San Diego, LA, through the Central Valley to the Bay Area. We now have a situation in San Diego, LA, San Diego, where with Amtrak and Metrolink and others, where the bluffs in Orange County and parts of San Diego County, where the train goes, of course, we all know the bluffs are collapsing. I guess it's my wish upon a star that we would use this opportunity to bring some vision and clarity to how we're going to fix this without spending multiple millions to do a quick fix and 20 or 30 years from now having to spend into the billions to get between San Diego and LA. The LA Anaheim portion is a part of it, but I want to make sure that we don't look at this as another commuter rail, and that that we think about the bigger picture as we go along. And that includes issues like grade separation. Here again in San Diego, we had an issue when I was on the Port Commission about grade separating the trolley. Some of the streets didn't need grade separation because they were not highly used, but the main street from the airport, there was talk about not separating the grade. We need to be looking at lessons like that, where the traffic is such that we have to separate the grade to keep the speed that we will need. So again, if we can all just keep the big picture in mind, that will probably not be completed before many of us are on this earth, but we have to look to the future to make sure that this is going to be high-speed rail, San Diego, LA, Central Valley to the Bay Area. And again, I commend you for the work that you have done on this piece. Thanks, LaDonna.
Thank you, Director Schenk. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, then Alicia, excuse me. Yeah, and this is for resolution HSRA 24-06. All right, we have a motion to approve. A second, please.
Second.
Okay. Was that Martha?
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion second. Please call the roll.
Director Schenk?
Yes.
Chair Richards?
Yes.
Director Camacho?
Yes.
Vice Chair Miller?
Yes.
Director Perea? Director Gometti? Director Escutia?
Yes.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Director Cohen? This motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Donna. It was an excellent presentation for you and your staff. Thank you. Item number 3, ladies and gentlemen, is the California High-Speed Rail Authority construction update. And CEO Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just by way of reminder for the board, we update the board at large twice a year in May and November on construction status on the project. And this time around, Chief Operating Officer Bill Casey will lead the presentation. He'll be joined by Ben Ruiz. Many of you may know Ben Ruiz as our CP23 lead in the region, but he's recently been promoted to the broader infrastructure delivery lead for us in the Valley. Ben's done outstanding work on the project. And between Ben and Bill and Daniel Horgan, they will present the construction update. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Casey, good morning.
Morning. I also have with us Chris Cryer, our Deputy Director of Real Property. If any questions associated with that. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So general status, 100% of the 171 miles has been environmentally cleared. Excuse me, of the 119 miles has been cleared. 52 miles advanced design work. Of course, going to Merced to Madera as well as into Bakersfield. Is in advanced design. Initial operations, our goal is to hit 2030 to 33, the initial operation of the 171 miles. We're advancing track and systems contracts this year. I'll have an update later on those. Train procurement, the RFP has been issued. We're looking to complete that this year and put the train procurement in process. And 30% design for Merced, Fresno, Kingston, and Bakersfield stations are in progress. Looking to have that by the end of the year. Next slide, please. Construction, where we're going, status, all major commercial issues have been identified in 2023 have been resolved. The only remainder is Cross Creek. That one is we have the arbitration ruling working the cost negotiations with the contractor. 99% of the parcel has been delivered to the design builders. Of course, CP4 is 100% complete with the parcels. We established new goals for 2024 for third-party relocations. We have 150 utilities we're looking to relocate this year. We've relocated or in progress 81, so 54% complete so far, which is a pretty good statistic. And then the revised baseline schedule. Last October, we implemented a revised baseline for CP1. We're looking to do the same thing for CP2-3 by the end of the summer. And our ultimate goal is to complete both those contracts in 2026. Next slide, please. Right-of-way status. 99% of the parcels have been delivered this year. 1% remains. We showed 26 parcels remaining. As of today, there's actually 25 remaining. The data date for this was in March. Next slide, please. And here's our right-of-way parcel process that you're familiar with. The point to make here is back in October, the snapshot had 37 remaining parcels. The snapshot as of March 31st is 25 remaining parcels, not 26 as shown. We had one parcel delivered at the end of April. So next slide, please. Next slide. So CP4, that's the southernmost CP contract that's under construction right now, roughly 22 miles. We achieved substantial completion in January. We're looking to get final completion in August near the end of summer. We just have one major issue, a 400-foot gap in the guideway due to water storage district issue we're working through, which I'll talk about later. Next slide. You can see our typical scorecard showing pretty much everything 100% complete with the overall contract 98% complete, nearing completion. Next slide, please. And now the remaining risk, of course, as I just mentioned, the 400-foot gap in the guideway due to a water storage district canal relocation. That work is, we are doing some work on that, but we don't have the full work complete yet and the full approval yet from the water storage district, but the CEO and the chair of the high-speed rail board are actively involved in helping resolve those issues with the water storage district to complete that and have the entire guideway from one end to the other CP4 complete. Next slide. CP1 package, that's the northernmost piece. That was the first CP that came out. We are targeting substantial completion in 2026. That's the RBS we executed last October. When I get into the risk later, I'll talk about some schedule pressure, but we are working hard with the contractor to deliver that CP. Let's go to the next slide. So here's our scorecard here. Of course, 100% of the design's been approved. Right-of-way parcels, 99% have been delivered. Utility relocations, 84%. Right now, working in the heart of Fresno, which is the toughest area to work, lots of utilities there. These are the hardest ones to get behind us, so they are posing some challenges. Structures complete are 85%. Miles of guideway, we have 63% complete. And the overall contract is 67% complete. Next slide. Here we show the overall progress of structures. 18 have been completed. We represent 55% of the total 33 structures. Underway, we have 10 on the graph. It's actually 11. We have one more, row 26, that just began recently, and which leaves 4 remaining to begin to complete the CP. Next slide, please. Guideway. 32 miles of guideway here. 56% of it's underway, 38% remaining, and 2% of it's complete so far. Next slide, please. So here's our risks. So our primary risks right now are delays associated with approvals with Union Pacific Railroad submittals, as well as City of Fresno submittals. We are working to elevate those at a higher level. Right now in the process, setting a meeting up with both UPR as well as the city with the CEO level to talk about how we can have a better relationship to make these things move. Because you're in the toughest area right now, downtown Fresno, right through heavily congested older areas, lots of utilities. It's a challenge. So we're going to work on a better relationship to be able to move the process forward. Some of the things we're working on is continuous improvement of our submittal quality. That's important so that we can hopefully get to a one-time submittal, one-time approval. Active engagement at the executive level with UPR. We have lots of focus meetings with the contractor, TPZP, UPR, City of Fresno, comment resolution meetings to move things forward, over-the-shoulder meetings, any dialogue we can have to move this process. And then we have continued partnering meetings with TPZP on a monthly basis. And in between, I personally meet with TPZP every 2 weeks to go through status and to work through issues with staff. Next slide, please. Utilities, high-level utility summary. 67% have been relocated, about 17% in progress, and 16% have not started yet. And as I said, we're working in a very congested area. Utilities are really the biggest thing to get out of our way to make things move. Here is our summary. I think Director Bray, you asked for this some time ago to give the summary of the electric, gas, telecom, and wet utilities, so you had a better understanding of what was outstanding. Next slide, please. Next slide. So CP23, this is the middle section, 65 miles. We're working to execute the RBS schedule in the summer. We've been working very hard with the contractor last year to develop mitigations and strategies to ensure we complete this project in 2026. Next slide. Here's our scorecard. 100% of the design has been approved. Right away, of course, is 99% complete. Utilities are 83%. Structures completed 82%. Miles of guideway complete 77%. And the overall contract is about 74% complete. Here is our in-progress structures. We have 16% completed and 24 underway, 9 remaining. Recently, we started manning, so that reduces that numbers. Now it's 25 underway with 8 remaining, because manning just began recently. Next slide, please. The guideway, 65 miles of guideway. There's 52% complete, 23% underway, and remaining 25%. But one thing I want to impress you is the statistic we're using this summer is we're going to move 3 million cubic yards of material. That is a lot of material. And the contractor is committed to do that, to move the guideway forward. So that's a statistic that we want to hit by the end of the year. In the next update, I want to be able to say we did that. Next slide. Utilities, 74% have been relocated, 9% in progress, and 17% complete of the total 701 utilities. Go to the next slide, please. So primary risks, delays with third-party approvals, they affect all the CPs. BNSF track shifts at CP Mammoth and CP Bowles. It's important that we hit those dates, and we're working directly with the contractor, BNSF, to make those happen. Also, PG&E changes in the requirements. Typically, most entities update the design standards. PG&E updates them, I believe, every 6 months. So now we're having to refresh those plans, which puts us back a little bit, which requires additional mitigation strategies to be able to complete the guideway and relocate. One of the transmission lines at Corcoran Avenue is affecting. It's not affecting the completion of the guideway because we implement mitigation strategy, but we did that so that we can relocate it afterwards before the tracking systems work to be able to complete CP23. We're also engaging in regular meetings, proactively resolving issues with third parties, with the contractor, and so forth. As I mentioned, the PG&E approvals, the plan sets really have a 6-month shelf life. So we're looking to work with them in MTEM and LGA to get approval to have a 1-year shelf life, so that when we complete the design, we're not having to constantly update them. But these updates are common to most agencies. It happens. And also partnering meetings. The same with CP1. Every 2 weeks, I'm meeting with CP23 and the staff, and every month we're meeting with the CEO in Sacramento to make sure we're driving that project to completion in 2026. Next slide, please. And Henry, again, for you, this is the breakdown of the utilities, something you asked for: electric, gas, telecom, and wet utilities, to show the status of all 701 utilities. Next slide. So one of the real high points is we've created over 13,000 jobs since the work began. But one thing I'd like to mention is the third week of May, we actually had 1,646 workers dispatched. That's an all-time high, and that's pretty incredible, knowing that the CP1 work has decreased. CP23 is really working hard. They have over 25 active sites, and they've really added additional resources to make everything move. And of course, 70% of the work is from disadvantaged communities, which is an incredible plus. Next slide, please. Now we're adding to this report. This is typically a construction update, but since we're getting into design, the extensions, the stations, we wanted to start adding information on those. So to give you an update on the Merced to Bakersfield extensions, notice to proceed to advance 100% design on Merced to Bakersfield has been issued. Of course, they'll still track into complete 30% design by the end of the year, but we got them going on the full 100%. In LGA down to Bakersfield, we're also targeting 30% design by the end of the year. However, we have given a limited notice to proceed for the shaft area. That's the grade separations, the subject of the Christie grant we received, to bring them to 60% design. And very shortly, we're going to issue an NTP to go to 100% as well. Right-of-way mapping for M10 and LGA. We're in the initial stages of that. We're looking at least in the order of 500 or more parcels. So we're starting to move on that. And we expect that number to grow a little bit as we get more definition to the design. But we've begun that work to acquire those parcels.
Bill, before you go,
sure.
With regards to when we are starting design work, at what point do we start talking with third parties?
As you get to 30%, we start now. I mean, now you start identify the right of way you need in third parties, and we start talking now. So working through the design standards, the designs of those. Mm-hmm. So that actually starts almost near the very beginning once you have
alignment. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Okay. Fresno stations. So here's the early works. In my follow-on presentation for our procurements, we'll talk a little bit about this. But we had the RAISE grant, so that's a subject of the retrofit of the historic building there, as well as the zero emissions mobility hub in Chinatown and the downtown plaza. And we're working towards completing those designs by the end of the year and then getting a contract out after the first of the year. And with that, any questions?
Yes, I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Director Escutia.
Thank you. Escutia.
Sorry.
I'm going, thank you for the presentation. Bill, may I call your attention to page 26, where you have that chart about utility relocation with regard to Central Valley. On this one, the figure that caught my attention was under electric, that there were 96, I guess, projects that had not been started. Do you consider that to be a large number?
Well, 96 is not a small number. I'm going to tell you that, but it's 25% of the total.
Right.
So given where we're at, I mean, ideally, the project comes out, they're all relocated. The design builds, everything was done live. I do not see that as a schedule risk at the moment because we are working with a contractor to make things move. But it is a number that we want to bring down for the next meeting. I don't have specific details of those individual utilities. I can bring that back. However, I would like it to be a smaller number, of course, but, but it is something we're working through.
Okay, and I do appreciate the chart, the utility chart. My next question is, in my mind, and maybe I am incorrect in the way I classify things in my mind, but in my mind, I view third-party, what you call third-party approvals, as only involving utility relocation. Are the rights of way separate from that?
Well, you have third-party approvals, utilities, railroads, cities, you know, right-of-way procurement happens to be able to relocate things to build the system, construction.
So would the rights of way issue come under this utility relocation?
It could affect them because we may need to procure certain areas of rights of way to do that.
Okay.
But it can have effect.
Now, you know, is there a similar chart, you know, just like this chart on utility relocation, is there a similar chart as to status of rights of way throughout the entire project?
Well, 99, I don't have it with me today. We can develop a chart. 99% of the right of way has been procured.
Yeah, just a comment on that we, in addition to the pie charts that are in this presentation for each of the CPs on the right of way status, we also report each month to the FNA, and it's in the FNA material. The Central Valley Status Update Report includes overall for all of it. And I could tell you that in the report for this month, there's 2,288 parcels that are needed for all of these construction elements for CPs 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 2,288 262 are done. So we're down to 24 parcels left out of that total.
The question I think is also with regards to the third parties and when we have to do work for relocation, do we know now in where you are, Bill, do we know now that that embedded in those parcels that we purchased and what ones which have not been purchased yet, does that cover all the parcels necessary even for the relocation of the utilities?
Let me bring up the Deputy Director of Right Away, Chris Quire, to give you the
a
better answer than I will.
Yes. Yes.
The real tough answer is yes.
Yeah, the answer is yes. So of those 25 parcels that are remaining today, they include parcels that have been identified that are needed for the utility relocations.
And so we expect no additional parcels to be needed from any of the other utilities or third parties that we're working with that we do not have full agreements with at this point.
We don't anticipate any more, but as the designs progress and those communications with the utilities progress, it's possible that additional parcels will be identified.
Yeah, so I should make one comment here that we have a policy of removing or relocating utilities in a way that do not require additional right-of-way. Sometimes, depending on the specific element at a specific site, you may need some additional right-of-way to move a utility a certain way. So and that's why you've seen, particularly in the F&A committee members, you've seen the right-of-way number bounce from time to time, 2292, 2293, 2288, because it bounces a little bit on all of that bounce is really tied to the utility relocation needs. But our policy is to design and affect utility relocation without the need for additional right-of-way. And so we maximize trying to do that. From time to time, there may be slivers of right-of-way we have to get to relocate a utility. But generally, we've identified what we have in our current right-of-way and try to get all the relocations within that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Director Gilmetti.
Bill, on the extensions, at what % of the design work will we know all the right-of-way we need, all the utilities we need to relocate, and any mitigation that we need to perform the extensions? What % of design will we know all that and identify them?
We have a pretty good idea right now, but by the time we finish 30% at the end of the year, we should have that pretty well nailed down. There will be some nuances that pop up, but we should have a pretty good understanding of what the right-of-way we need and utilities relocated.
And all the right-of-way associated. Our right-of-way people will be able to identify what we need to acquire, as well as areas that we need to relocate utilities.
Right. They've already identified between partial takes and full takes, a little under 500 total parcels. They do expect that to grow a little bit as we complete the 30% design, but they're already actively doing that.
And at what point will we start acquiring the right-of-way?
We're in appraisal now. We're starting appraisal now on some of those right-of-ways for the extensions. And as Bill noted, with the 30%, at the 30% design, there's a full takes and partial takes. And we're starting on the those that are, I think, full takes now, or we'll start first on the full takes, then get to the partial takes as the design gets from 30 to 60%, and then ultimately 90 and 100%. So we're going to start some of that process by the end of this year on the full take requirements. And as he said, as the design develops, we will we'll refine those numbers as we go. I think the only other thing I wanted to mention about that is that Bill said, I think right now we've identified about 470 parcels for the combined extensions of Bakersfield and Merced. And also in that design contract is a requirement for us to get the 100% of the design done for the utility relocations and 100% of a right-of-way acquisition plan in place. So that's part of that design contract that we were executing.
Do we anticipate two separate contracts, one going into Bakersfield and one going into Merced?
I believe we do. I have.
You mean on design?
No, on construction.
I think, well, I think there'll likely
Oh.
be several construction contracts, but.
Yeah, we're looking at multiple construction contracts and we're looking at a couple of things. You know, we want to build to the north in Merced, to south into Bakersfield, so that you can march out with your track, so to speak. We also want to work around areas that we can get. You know, there may be parcels hard to get than others. We don't want to issue a contract. We don't have right of way utilities relocated. So we're going to be looking hard at what is the most opportune way to issue contracts to go after the 20, 30, 33 schedule, as well as smaller contracts. We want to keep them under 500 million if possible and bring them down and allow more opportunities for smaller contractors to get involved, and also allow more opportunities for design, bid, build, the traditional measure of work that is traditional delivery method out there. So conservatively, I guess maybe in the order of 10 contracts to Merced to Madera and LGA. I don't think we've broken it up is to that definition, but it could expand as work is designed, areas are made available, and we may have separate contracts for utility relocations and separate contracts for guideway construction. So we're looking at all those things.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, sir, Director Perea.
Couple of questions. Thank you for the report, Bill. This may be another report or presentation, but talking about the tracking systems, once that starts going in and the electrification of that system, I know our proposal is to primarily power it with solar. So, you know, a lot of questions around that with respect to, you know, do we have all the sites already secured, you know, for the execution of the solar infrastructure, as well as we're going to have backup electrical system, if I understand it correctly. So is all that land available, and you know, what is that? In other words, what does all that look like? Number one. And the other question I have has to do with the track. You know, confirm if I heard this correctly. Are we going to start building and laying track in Bakersfield coming north?
We're going to start with CP4. That's the one that's available,
right?
And we're going to work north and south. So we're building a railhead. We're working towards design of building a railhead in CP4 area in the southern end. Mm-hmm. We're also looking at one in the northern end, because we want to build to the middle and build to the out. So have a north railhead and a south railhead makes sense. But CP4 will start it because it's available. Around 26, you know, when we complete CP1, CP2, 3, we'll start those as well. Other areas in CP1, 2, 3 might come available sooner than other areas. Like the north of CP1 will probably be available before the middle of CP1. So we'll want to start building up there if possible.
Yeah.
So we're looking at all those ways to make the schedule move faster.
Okay. So CP4 is what, 21, 22 miles?
Yeah.
Give or take?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm trying to wrap my head around is we have 119 miles that we actually have money for to complete. Mm-hmm. We have that segment.
Correct. The single track.
A single track, yes, for
now.
If we start construction in Bakersfield and go north.
Well, Wasco would be the Wasco area.
Okay. How far does the money that we currently have take us in constructing that line? Well, and considering that we have that independent utility requirement by the feds on that 119 miles, if we build it in segments as they become available, how do we create independent utility?
Well, the single track is funded for the full 119. I believe, and Brian, you can correct me wrong, but we're looking at cap and trade money to fill in the gap, and also future federal grants to fill in the gap to complete the double track from the north to the south.
And also, just as a matter of sequencing, which I think is part of what you're getting to, as a matter of sequencing, we're going to build the 119 first. So in terms of track, electrification, testing of trains, that's going to be on the 119 first. And as we are testing the electrified system and those trains on 119 miles, we'll be extending and expanding the construction on each end. But the electrification, the track being laid, all of that will be 119 miles first. And that's also part of our federal grant requirement. We have to do that in that sequence.
Right. Okay. But my question is, if we're building out that, say, that 21 miles in CP4, that money is coming from the 119 that we have funding for.
That's part of the 119. That is the 119.
Yes.
Everything north of Wasco is the 119.
Okay.
So yeah, so we will We are certainly going to expend our resources to get the 119 done first for, at a minimum, testing and certification purposes, as we then expand the construction and ultimately start laying the track on the extensions each side. And so we're clear for that. We need additional, federal and state funding to complete that, but we got to get the 119 done first.
Okay, so the 119 is CP1, basically.
All the way through 4.
Madera, just outside of Madera to just outside of the Wasco area.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And the other question, the right-of-way, let me just double check, but I believe, Chris, we have all the right-of-way for the traction power and the solar station.
So for the traction power, as it's designed today, yes, we have all of those included in our parcels. For solar, the ideal solution is to use property that we've acquired that isn't needed for the corridor. So in some areas, we've bought additional property because at the owner's request, because they didn't want to keep a remainder, and we'd like to use that for the solar areas.
Yeah, maybe in the future, if you could do a presentation on that, what all that really, go into a little more detail, okay, what it looks like, what it costs, et cetera. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Bill, great presentation. Thank you very much. This is very helpful for all of us.
I'm up again, yeah.
You're up.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do is update you on our procurement plan, as well as an outreach we did on May 7th, a small business and industry outreach. And that outreach happened on May 7th. There we presented the overview of the program. We had Brian Ennis talk about the program funding status, our chief financial officer. I provided an update on the procurements itself, and then we had Dominic Rulins on the behalf of Bruce Armistead presented on the rail work coming up. For the station designer, Meg Cedoroth presented. For the M10 and LGA extensions, Christine Inouye presented, and Ben Ruiz, that Brian just introduced a minute ago, talked about the construction contracts. We also talked about small business, disadvantaged business, DB program, community benefits agreement, conflict of interest policy, and so forth. So some of the things we really underscored at the start of the presentation is our milestones, our importance that we want to hit this 2030 to 33 schedule for the 171. That we have to do. So we want industry to know that's important to us, and they are part of helping make that happen. We talked about the work itself we're going to do that. There's $15 billion worth of work we're going to do over the next 6 to 9 years. That is an incredible amount of work. And for those familiar with the Bay Bridge, that was about $6 billion for the east spans. That took 20 years. On average, you did $3 billion in 10 years. We're going to do $15 billion in 10 years. That is a magnitude larger than the Bay Bridge work when you look at the totality of what we're going to perform. We talked about the construction methods. We emphasize that design, bid, build is the industry standard. We will be doing design, bid, build work. We're looking at also alternate delivery methods. Can you back up one slide, please? We're looking at CMGC, construction manager, general contractor, as well as progressive design build, alternate delivery methods. If you recall, we provided a presentation to you back in July on those methods. We talked about collaboration. How important is that we need to collaborate with industry? We wanted to make sure they understood we're all in this together, and that we will work with everyone, and we look at all problems as our problems. They're not the contractor's problem, not the designer problem, they're our problems. We solve them together. And we really want to underscore that we want to be the owner of choice. We want industry to want to work with us. So that's important to us. We also talked about success, how we would measure success. And success we're measuring in 2 ways. Are we meeting our schedule? Are we hitting all our milestones to meet the 171 miles, the initial operating segment between 2030 and 33, and quality? In the business plan, we talked about setting a standard for best in the nation quality. We wanted the entire industry to know that is something that we want and we will achieve. So those are 2 measures of success that we talked about. Then we moved on to the delivery team that's going to do this, that's going to deliver this program, all the procurements. You have Bruce Armistead, the chief of rail and operations. handling the rail design, some of the rail support contracts. Margaret Cederoth, Director of Planning and Sustainability. She's managing the station design. Christine Inouye, our Chief Engineer of Strategic Delivery. She's managing the extensions. Merced to Madera and down into Bakersfield, the LGA. And Ben Ruiz, the newest member, recently promoted to the Director of Infrastructure Delivery. He will be managing all the construction contracts, all the rail construction contracts, station construction contracts, as well as the extension construction contracts. Next slide. And here's our revised procurement strategy. Everything that's shaded or procurements that are behind us or in progress already. We have the rail systems engineering support contract. That's Network Rail. That's been awarded. We have the track and OCS design contract. And we put out the notice. It was, I believe, Sistra and TIPSA were the selected candidates for that contract. We also talked about the construction manager general contractor contract for the track and OCS. That contract we're estimating for the full 171 is going to be the order of $2 billion. Now, it won't be a massive $2 billion contract to start. It will eventually grow there. The CMGC process will have initial NTP for pre-construction services, design support, and then for each construction contract or areas that becomes available that we want to issue, for instance, CP4 will be initial contract, that'll be separate NTPs that, of course, would have board approval before we move forward. Then we go into the two progressive design build contracts, one for signaling, train control, core communications, SCADA systems, so forth, and one for traction power. Those ones will happen, physical construction work will happen after the CMGC contract has had enough track and OCS put in that they can work behind them. However, we wanted their services on before the CMGC services because they're going to perform the design. That'll be progressive design build for both of those. And though the reason we're going to have the contract design is it's more supplier-driven designs. You know, the industry would design those things like traction power and core communication signaling. So we want to bring those on first to get those design services working with our track and OCS designer, as well as the train cars, the manufacturer. Those two contracts, we're looking at about a little over $1 billion each one. They will eventually grow. Again, they'll be issued as NTPs, initial NTP for design services. Of course, we'll come back here for board approval, as well as subsequent construction NTPs as areas are available, because we don't envision issuing the entire thing in one shot. It's going to be issued as funding's available and areas of work are available. Because right now the corridor is not fully funded. There's roughly a $7 billion shortfall. And that's one of the things we want to tell industry, because they need to know the totality of these contracts, how large they're going to grow, so they bring their A team. If we tell them it's something smaller, like just CP4 for CMGC, and say it's $500 million, they're not going to bring their A team. They're going to bring their B or C team. We want the A team. We want to let them know what they're getting themselves into, because we want the best they have to offer to make this program move. And then, of course, we get into the train sets and the driving simulator. The board approved that last month, the RFP. So that one is behind us. It's in process. We talked about depots and facilities. We're going to have a design contract coming out for the depots and facility design. And we're looking at multiple construction contracts to go construct those, the depots and facilities. And the idea here is we want smaller contracts. We want to create more opportunities for smaller businesses, more opportunities for design, bid, build, more competitive methods. So having smaller contracts, smaller construction manager contracts allows others to compete that normally couldn't compete. We're going to have an independent cost estimator that we'll use for the CMGC and the progressive design build. They will help us reconcile costs with the contract. Contract will perform their costs, we'll perform ours, and we have an independent cost estimator helping work all three parties coming to a reasonable number to come to agreement. We'll have a construction manager, a separate construction manager to manage the construction contract for the track and OCS CMGC contract. We'll have a separate construction manager for the signaling and train control. We'll have a separate construction manager for the traction power. Again, we're looking to get smaller contracts. If we did one contract for the CMGC progressive design build, you're looking at $1 billion construction manager contract. That's not one of our values. Our values are smaller contracts, more industry resource involved to make things move. We'll have multiple construction managers for the facilities because they'll be located in different areas. So we're envisioning different construction projects throughout the 171 for those, because they're not all in one place. So we'll have separate construction managers for the facilities tied to a specific construction contract. Integration support, we're looking to put out a contract for that as well. And the independent safety assessor, that procurement's in process right now. So that's all the rail construction, and we have indicative timing of when those will come to market on the far right column. One thing I do want to say is with these larger contracts in particular, the CMGC, the Progressive Design Build, we've talked to industry quite a bit. One of the things we're going to do before we put out the RFP to market, we want to put out a draft of what the RFP looks at, so the contracting community can comment on this, give us feedback, because what we don't want to do is have procurement that has lots of problems. We want to get their input, their involvement, so that these things go with no problem, because they're new to us. We haven't done a CMGC or Progressive Design Build. Caltrans does a lot of CMGC work. They have that process down. They just put out their first Progressive Design Build. So there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve here with some of these alternate delivery methods. Moving on, next slide, please. We also talked about the stations and the historic depot. So the stations, we're looking at four construction contracts. They're in design right now with Arab Foster's, Merced, Fresno, Kings Tulare, and Bakersfield. And we're looking at having separate construction management contracts for each of those contracts, because they will come out at different times. So we have the opportunity to have smaller CM contracts to allow smaller businesses to compete. Then in the historic depot, that's Page and Turnbull. They're doing the design for that. We're looking to get a construction contract and a CM construction management contract out the first of next year. We'll complete that design this year. And that's a contract that's right for small business. They're small, and small businesses can compete very well for that. Next slide. And then the extensions. This is a little bit less definition here, because we have not got to 30% design yet. We have not identified all of the various construction contracts we'll have. And again, that has to do with areas that are ready to go. We have right-of-ways cleared. We have the utilities cleared. Sorry, we have procured the right-of-way, as well as we have the funding. So we're envisioning multiple construction contracts. The point of this to industry is telling them what's coming. We're looking at 2026 to really get that work going, with the exception of probably Shafter. We have a Chrissy grant on Shafter, and we're discussing whether or not construction has to start in 2025. We're discussing how we would get that contract out there, probably through alternate delivery, CMDC contract. But to give the industry a good idea of the totality, M2M, you're looking at almost $3 billion worth of work, construction work. And going down to Bakersfield, the LGA looking about $2 billion. So it gives them a flavor how large it's going to be. However, we did underscore again, smaller contracts, more industry resources involved, because that's a value to us, to get more people involved and create more opportunities for smaller business. And with that, that's the presentation we provided industry, as well as an update to yourselves on the status of procurements.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Director.
Go back on the OCS contract, page 3.
Sure.
You say that was awarded?
The design contract?
Yes.
That was selected at the NOPA was issued.
I'm sorry, it was selected in what?
The NOPA, notice of proposed award was issued.
Okay, so it's going to come to the board before it's awarded?
Yeah, for the first NTP, it would have to come back to you for an NTP and approval.
From a protocol standpoint, you've notified that, made that public before it came to the board?
Yes, like we do with all
of them. Well, I'm just trying to understand the rationale behind that.
Yeah, so we came to the board to go out with that RFQ on that, and went through the scoring process that we go through. We had 2 bidders on this. We put out publicly the notice of the award winner, I want to say a week ago or something like that. We come back to the board after we negotiate with that proposed award to release the award. And we'll come back to the board on that, I want to say at either the June or the August board hearing. The June board hearing for the release of the contract for the design work on the OCS.
No, that was an RFP, not an RFQ.
That was RFQ.
RFQ was
There was RFQ, yeah.
It was an RFQ.
Yeah.
So it was just the qualifications.
Right.
But we have 2 bidders, you said.
Correct. There were two proposers for that one.
So was there a pre-selection on those on the RFQ? I mean, generally speaking, now you're going to negotiate terms which would kind of reflect that it would be an RFP.
No, it's an RFQ. It's not an RFP. There's no cost.
We're not talking price.
No, not talking price. It's time material. It's design. It's A&E services, which is design material, architecture and engineering services.
So when do you anticipate it coming before the board?
June.
Yes, June.
In June, the next board meeting?
Yes.
And so that's time and materials with a not to exceed number on it.
We would have an NTP with a not to exceed value, correct? The NTP is for them to do work with a not to exceed, sure. Yeah. Similar to the design service contracts for Stantec doing Merced and Madera, as well as HNTB doing down in LGA.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes, Director Escutia.
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 Oh, Lord. Forget it. As a follow-up to this thing called NOPA, Notice of Proposed Award. This is the first time I've heard that acronym. Going back to the chart that you just showed of all the procurements that are, of all the contracts that are going to be coming up before this board, of those, can you identify which of those contracts are going to be preliminarily decided pursuant to this NOPA process?
Well, that's typical to all these procurements.
Okay, I understand the question, because our procurement process is such that, you know, we put out a procurement, bidders come in, we look at the bids and we go through a scoring process on all the bids. We ask the board first to go ahead and start that process. The board tells us to do it. We go out and do it. And then as we go through the scoring, which is both the scoring of the written submitted statements of qualifications, as well as verbal discussions with the invited teams that are eligible to, that meet all the eligibility requirements and their SOQs have met the standards for the procurement. We invite them for discussions. We go through those discussions and then they are scored. And then we issue a notice of proposed award to that winning bidder. And typically that's what we've done on all of our procurements to date and we continue to do going forward. And then we come back to the board to approve the ultimate award. And of course, if we have a highest score that we do not successfully negotiate the contract with, we move to the second or the third or the fourth on the scoring.
To me, ultimately, it doesn't matter who is the one that gets the highest score. To me, the most important thing is to ensure that the process is fair and that the process is open, that a lot of stakeholders would want to, you know, consider submitting, you know, proposals for this. And I guess if you sense any reluctance on my part, Brian, it's because I think I feel a disconnect as a board member in terms of what's really going on between what the staff does and by the time it comes to the board. I feel that by the time it comes to the board, the decisions have already been made. And it kind of makes me feel a little bit uneasy.
Well, the only thing I could tell you is that the procurement process we run is open, fair, transparent. We report to the board and ask the board for permission to go. When we go through the process, we come back to the board and report to the board what that process resulted in. And we ask the board for permission to proceed with the contract. If any board member wants to review the scoring, we can make that available to the board members to do so. A lot of this, we don't go through scoring in a public way because you don't know if we have to go to the second or third bidder at times and what those reasons might be. But our process has been fair, transparent, consistent with public contract code, our authorities under the statute. And it's the process we've certainly followed since I've been here. And now we're on the edge of the beginning of a lot of procurements coming fairly fast and furious. And so that is our process, but, you know, happy to entertain direction on doing something differently. But
as you well, Chair Richards, happy for the legal team to come and present on this process.
It's just a moment, Alicia. Process. So the question also with what Brian just said. So I think that what we want to do is clearly be consistent with what the state of California does. And so I think it's a process that we've been using this for as long as I think I've been around.
Yes.
But I think that the key here is to be assured as a board that this is the way in the state of California, this is the way agencies do the business. So I think that if we can do this in June, in advance of this coming back, if you would prepare that, let's agendize that for June. Does that make sense for you, Director Escutia?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was even going to ask, if at all possible, can I get some kind of a lesson on Procurement 101? So that I really understand, because I'm getting very worried. As I said, I see the schedule of all these, multi-million-dollar and the hundreds of millions of contracts. And I feel very, just even very reluctant to vote on this, because I just want to make sure that the process is fair, and I remind you, Mr. Chairman, as well as the rest of the board members, I spent a lot of time with Alicia and Nancy and Tom Felens in terms of drafting a conflict of interest policy, that would assure, that impartiality that we need in all of our decision-making. And I made it very clear when we presented this that it was not only applicable to external stakeholders, but also to us internally, not only, board members, but also staff, as to how we carry our own business internally. And I would love to know, for example, what are the conditions that go into drafting an RFP or an RFQ? Who is drafting that for us? Is this person qualified? That staff person qualified to draft those RFQs for us? Do they have any conflicts, as they're drafting RFQs or RFPs? It's that kind of perhaps minutia that would make me feel a little bit more comfortable, to understand that as we go forward in the next year of all these contracts that we have to look at, that the underlying documents, the underlying documentation, the underlying performance by our own internal staff is above reproach. And so I just want to put that for the record, because I don't want to go back 10 years from now and say, Martha Escutia, why the hell were you silent? So
I think all those are very good points. Alicia, all of what you present next month, please incorporate everything that Director Escutia has mentioned, and it will be helpful for the entire board.
Absolutely. And we can set up a pre-briefing with board members.
Yeah, and so I would encourage then all of us to, in advance of that, when we have our briefings to board members, in order to get as much of the questions that they may have, to make sure that when you actually present it, that you incorporate those in what you've heard in the previous few days before the next month's meeting. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Alicia.
You're welcome, Director Escutia. Yes, Director Perea.
Yeah, I have one question. Bill, thank you again for that presentation. I just want to go back to page 3 and ask you a question with respect to the 3 construction managers. Mm-hmm. And I understand your explanation as for 3 separate managers. My question is, I mean, obviously they're so interrelated: tracking systems, train control, traction power. How do you manage the potential for miscommunications between 3 different contract managers? How do you make sure that they're in sync 100%?
Well, that's on us. I mean, we're going to have construction coordinators out there, weekly meetings, discussions. We're going to manage them directly, similar to, I'll give you an example, Caltrans in the Bay Bridge. We had about 6, 7 contractors at any one time. We managed that. Caltrans managed that by meeting every week with all the contractors, partnering meetings, collaborative meetings, discussing work plans, work schedules, deciding who gets what area at what time. That's going to be on us to do that. And we're going to have a consultant resources to support us. The PDS contract will help support Ben Ruiz, our infrastructure delivery director, with a coordination effort. We're going to hire consultant construction managers, separate to help coordinate, and we're going to work with all of them to bring them together. That's going to be on us to make sure that that happens.
Okay. So what is the risk or the dangers of if you had one construction manager doing all three? What's the downside of that?
Well, now you're beholden to one construction manager for the whole corridor. That's going to be a massive contract. That's probably going to grow to well over $1 billion. That'll be very large. And that'll be a suck on one contract, a huge drain of personnel from one contract coming in. Question is, do they have all the resources? Some of the larger consultant firms will have that, but it also doesn't help with other firms getting involved. We're trying to create more competition and more opportunities to get more industry resources involved.
Well, that's important, but that's not our number one priority. Our priority is getting it done. So I'm just trying to think through what is the most effective and efficient way to do that. I mean, if you're doing the oversight, whether it's one CM or 3 or 4 CMs, you have that oversight. So,
in my experience, you can do both. We
both.
can very effectively do both. And I have no question that we can make this work.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
One last question. Maybe this is for Alicia. Following up on Henry's question about the CM firms and the way you're unbundling it, breaking it up for different CM firms. Does an award for one portion of it prevent a CM firm from bidding on the next portion as well?
I mean, as always, we'd have to review all the facts, but generally no.
I'm sorry?
We'll have to review all the facts, but generally no, that would not be an immediate problem.
So one could hypothetically bid on 2 or 3 sections of that massive RFP system.
It's quite possible, yes.
Okay.
As long as they're not, again, overseeing their own work. It's one of the biggest things we're looking for.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Casey? Bill, thank you very much. We'll now move on, ladies and gentlemen, to item number 5, the CEO report. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members. I want to just roll through the CEO report for this month. A couple of things I want to cover. The first is something that's been very effective in recent years, particularly in 2022. I think in 2023 it was very helpful for us, particularly when we were pursuing federal funds, that we are identifying that the milestones that we're trying to reach or hit in a calendar year, and then work really hard to hit those. And what I wanted to do this year, which we didn't really formally do with the board in 2023, but I thought it was worthwhile, was to go through some of the things that are really important to us to hit in 2024, the remainder of 2024, and again, come back and as 25 comes up with a new list of the milestones that we're working through. So with that, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on that and then talk about a couple of other things that we've been up to in between board meetings. So the first is in the area of, excuse me just one second, in the area of project delivery, we have milestones in several different categories, but in the area of project delivery, what you'll see in 2024, particularly in the Central Valley, you heard in the earlier construction presentation, we're at 13,000 construction jobs created. We seek to surpass 14,000 during the calendar year of 2024. There are several construction updates in terms of the start or the opening of structures and guideway and the completion of that work. So between CPs 1 and 2, 3 in 2024, we'll begin the full construction of 6 additional structures. We will add an additional 5 miles of guideway, and we will complete and open 5 additional structures amongst the 2 CPs that are remaining. And of course, on CP4, as was mentioned, we've reached substantial completion, and we're looking to get to final completion in 2024. On the station side, we're working through completing the schematic designs for the Central Valley stations by Q3. That's really getting to the 30% standard of the station designs. We'll complete fully the Fresno Historic Depot design and the Fresno Plaza design relative to some of the early works or the early community activities that could happen at that station site in Fresno. Under rail operations and procurement, as noted, we want to release the RP and award the contract for train sets. That is now out. and we'll be finalizing that and looking to award that contract probably at the end of Q3 of 2024. We want to award the contract for the track and systems design that we just talked about, and we'll come back to the board for that in June. I mentioned, and I know Bill will describe the industry forum that we conducted on May 7th. You'll see us doing more of those as we go forward. And as Bill mentioned, on some of the large procurements that are up and coming, we'll be releasing draft of those RFP documents so we can get industry feedback on those before we finalize those. On the litigation side, we are working towards settlement of litigation. Millbrae is not specifically listed here, but in the Bay Area, we have Millbrae, Brisbane, and the Baylands Development, Inc. These milestones are the ones that I really think I'm feeling highly confident we can get done in calendar year 2024. Brisbane and Baylands Development are certainly under that category. Our goal is to get Millbrae done as well. That one seems to be slightly behind Brisbane and BDI. So as a milestone, we want to get Brisbane and Baylands done. Our goal is to get Millbrae done as well. Next slide. In terms of our work with our federal partner for the remainder of 2024, we are applying actively for continued federal grants for elements of this program. We looked at what's on the calendar from the federal government. We'll have 9 federal grants that we will pursue in 2024. We want to complete the renewal of NEPA assignment. As this board knows, this project was granted the first in the country NEPA assignment for a railroad project. We've used that greatly to our advantage to complete the environmental documents that we've been bringing before the board. That expires later in the year, and so we're looking at renewing that and hope to have that completed in the summer here of 2024. And of course, it's important that we obligate all of the grant awards that we've received. And so we are working closely with the FRA, our team, Alicia, our legal team, others working to make sure that all of the grant awards we received in 2023 are fully obligated. And again, our goal on that right now is to complete that in August of this year.
Brian, can you just if you're able, just roughly the total amount with the 9 federal grants that you're talking about?
I'll have to go back and look at the total amount. I can tell you that we have 3 that are in right now that total about $312 million. The next large one that we'll see will be, again, there'll be a federal state redo later in the year. That's a big number. So we go back and look at what we're going to apply for that. So that'll be the largest one that's in front of us. That might leak into 25. It really depends on what the federal government does on that grant. So I can come back with a specific number on what we think those are.
Thank you.
I can tell you the 3 outstanding now are about $312 million.
Okay. Thank you.
Right now. Under project controls and risk, as you know, every time we come up to a new project update report or a business plan, and we will have a project update report in 2025, we'll revisit the master schedule for the 171-mile operating segment and a full cost review for all of our system. Right now, we're completing that for the Palmdale Burbank environmental section, but all of it will be redone as we get toward the end of 24, so we can update reports that are due in 2025. Strategic delivery is primarily what we call internally the Christine Inouye part of our world, and that is the extensions to Merced and to Bakersfield. She's heading up that work, getting to that 30% design for the Bakersfield and Merced extensions. We will complete final 30% design in 2024. We're already beginning some of the work for getting into 60% design for things like the shaft to grade separations that are in front of us. And so that'll be part of this. Begin right-of-way acquisitions. We talked about that earlier for the Bakersfield and Merced extensions. That will commence in 2024. We want to certify the environmental document for Palmdale to Burbank. Our plan right now, members, is to come back to you in June to finalize that environmental document to certify the ROD for the Palmdale to Burbank segment. If we do that at the June hearing, then all of San Francisco to downtown Los Angeles will be environmentally cleared, and that's a major accomplishment both for the team and for the authority. We also want to we're going to issue the draft, having just had the board adopt the preferred alternative for the LA to Anaheim segment. We will this year issue the draft. I think it's scheduled for July 2nd, but issue the draft for the LA to Anaheim segment Then we'll go through that environmental process, ultimately come back to you guys at the end of 25 to certify that environmental document. So we have a lot of work in front of us on that. And then under strategic communications, that's of course an ongoing thing that we're always doing when we have major accomplishments. I think things like, off the top of my head, awarding, the train set manufacturing contract. I think that'll be a good reason to communicate. We should do something probably public, very public with that award. But the other big thing that we have just on the communication side is a little bit unique for us. Is the board members know we've got mock-ups of our train sets out at the Cal Expo, and every year in Sacramento is the State Fair. That is a 2-week thing where the public comes, a couple 100,000 people come through that fair every summer. And we will be doing a full exhibit at that for both stations and the trains for this upcoming State Fair in July. Next slide. We just talked a little bit about the federal grants. The 3 that we have outstanding right now are the RAISE grant, which I know Brian Annis mentioned with the FNA, but we've got 3 grants outstanding right now. These 3 combined for about $312 million. One is the RAISE grant for finishing the full design of the Merced integrated station. That's about a $16 million grant, $4 million match from us. GRIP is not typically an area that we identified initially as a place we would compete for federal money, but so this is outside of transportation. Next slide, please. The GRIP is the Grid Resilience and Innovation Program. This is about a $60 million grant application that we have in place right now, and that is to help fund some of the solar equipment and materials for the solar powering of our system. This is one that we applied for before. We did not get. We met with folks from Department of Energy. They encouraged us to apply again. So we've come back with this application. We'll hope to hear later in the year about this one, but this is the second one that's pending. And then the third one, next slide, is the largest of the 3, and this is for full construction of the Merced integrated station. The grant request is about $236 million on the federal side, matched with about $157 million from the state side, and this is really for the full build of the Merced intermodal station in downtown Merced. So these are the 3 that we have outstanding right now. Next slide. One of the really nice things that Meg Cederoth, her planning team, our communications team, and our design teams did last week was 4 open houses in each of the Central Valley cities where we are advancing stations. This was, we heard earlier from the public comment, the representative from the city of Merced, but this is where we had the public come in each of the 4 cities, go through our designs as we have them now of each of the 4 stations in Bakersfield, Hanford, Fresno, and Bakersfield. 650 plus people attended over 4 days. A lot of earned media on this in the Central Valley media stations, and a really solid public comment and response from the community on our stations. This was a very, very good work by our team, our staff, Meg, her team, and the communications team and the design team.
Brian, sorry, what does earned media audience mean?
Let me look at my media expert. Melissa, come on up. Come here. What? Yeah, it's essentially media that we don't have to pay for. Huh. So this is things like, a lot of news stories that covered these events. They got a lot of television coverage, social media coverage.
I assume so, but when you say audience, 463 million, it sounded like that 463 million people, but wow. Okay, I understand.
Okay. Melissa says it is. So.
It's the number of individuals that are opening clicks on newspaper articles. It's the number of newspaper views that you see online and also in print. It's also television media audiences, viewership, and the publicity value is 4.4 million as well.
Okay.
We got a lot of really
more than the population of the country. Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Just clicks and stuff. So it could be one person clicking 10 times.
Well, we hope not.
Right.
Yes.
But It could. All right. All right. Next slide, please. Bill already really covered this, so I'll be brief. But again, on May 7th, we had a very good and strong procurement outreach with small businesses and major contractors about the procurement process that we went through. That presentation that Bill just gave all of you, including the team that's heading each of our divisions on this, what we're looking for in procurements, and our procurement schedule was presented at this. We had 180 participants, 27 small business firms that set up tables for outreach. It was a very positive event. We've gotten a lot of good response to it. And again, this is something we're going to see more out of the authority on as we get through this procurement process. And as we said, more interaction with industry, even on the drafts of the RPs themselves. Next slide. Oh, lastly was a major event earlier in the month, which was Brightline West groundbreaking in Las Vegas. We were all invited along with the U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, the board chair, Director Camacho, Director Shank, myself went out there, and it was just another really good event for a groundbreaking that hundreds of people participate. Again, the secretary came out, the governor of the state of Nevada, both senators, congressional people from 2 states, a very strong event. And again, when I think about us and the things that we have in front of us, things like the award of the contract for manufacturing train sets, which is largely funded by the federal grant we just received. That's an opportunity for another good, big kind of public event on who and where our trains will be manufactured. So looking for some of this too, but just wanted to note that this was a very strong event and a good event that Brightline put on in Southern.
Yeah, Brian, I don't know if you mentioned, but our chairman was there as well.
Yeah, I did. I said.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't hear.
Yeah. And then we've got here in the room, I'm showing pictures of folks who were with the secretary. Anyway, it's a good event. Just wanted to update that as well. I think that's probably the conclusion of my CEO report. Next slide. That's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Brian? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director Camacho is going to take care of the finance and audit short report for the rest of the board and for the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a summary of the F&A committee report through March 31st. First off, we'll go cash management report. The authority is in a strong cash position with a total of total cash available, all funds, $2.9 billion. Individual fund balances, Prop 1A, $120.2 million, cap and trade, $2.8 billion. On April 4th and April 18th, the Treasurer's Office conducted bond sales that netted the authority a total of $800 million in Prop 1A funds, and this reflected the next month's this will be reflected in the next month's cash balance. Estimated cap and trade proceeds from February 24 auction are $325.5 million, which is the second largest auction proceeds realized by the authority to date and will be reflected in next month's cash balance. Admin budget and expenditure report. The authority spent $6.2 million in admin costs in the reporting period. Capital outlay budget. Monthly capital outlay expenditures for March were $108.3 million. Design build expenditures, $68 million for CP1, 18.9, CP23, 39.1, CP4, 10 million. Preliminary monthly expenditure for April are about $123.4 million. Grants, federal reimbursement was received for the 2022 RAISE grant for Merced Extension, which was $11.5 million in federal funds matched by 7.4 cap and trade. This is the first reimbursement from the new grants award. Contingency summary. As of the end of the reporting period, the authority has $940.5 million in remaining contingency, specifically for construction packages, CP1 395.3, CP23 498.5, CP4 46.7 million. The Central Valley CP labor has an average of about 1,500 daily workers on site. This has an increase of 232 workers over the previous period. Utility relocation status, 29 relocations were completed during the reporting period. Completed 1,314, which is 72%. In progress, 245 or 13%. Not started, 217 or 15%, for a total of 1,836 sites. Construction progress, CP23, 1 mile of additional guideway was completed and 1 structure was started in March. Right away, 1 parcel was delivered from CP1 in the reporting period. There are 2,262 out of 2,287, or 99% parcels delivered to date. Mr. Chairman, that completes my report.
Thank you, Director Camacho. Any questions? All right. The next item is, are there any comments on any subject matter from any of the board members? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, other than a closed session, this completes our agenda today. I don't expect the closed session to last probably more than 30 minutes, after which I'll come back out and report to you whether there's anything that there is to report, but at least to let you know that we'd concluded the business of the closed session for today. So with that, the board will now go into closed session.
Kept me awake.
You can just be.
Where's my upper and lowercase? I don't understand.
Thank you.
Pretty good. She's gonna reach out to Dennis. There was something that they put in the all of the I think we already
Hey, Boris, that looks like we got Min Ming and Jim. Oh, I think we're just going to that room.
she's gonna see.
In the small room.
Upstairs on 4 or here?
Right here.
I only have that room held for 1 hour. I have that room held for 1 hour. Okay, all right. I'll let them know. Thank you. Justin, are we live?
Ladies and gentlemen, the Board of Directors for the California High-Speed Rail Authority have completed its closed session for today, May the 16th. We have nothing to report, and with that, the board meeting for May 16th, 2024 is now adjourned.